Now, the king's chamber, of course, is the area that is the most beautiful. If you go into the pyramid and you're hiking around in there, just like what Napoleon was doing, you're going to come up to this top area, and inside this beautiful cathedral-like room made of purple granite that actually has fresh air because they've got these air vents to the outside. Inside the room is this granite sarcophagus that is also made out of the same purple granite. Now, Napoleon was one of the first people to go in as an explorer and see this because his country was financing a lot of the pyramid research that was being done. And he actually did spend a night lying in the Great Pyramid sarcophagus because it is very conveniently designed where a human body could lie down inside of it. Now, is it a tomb? Was there a mummy in it? No. This is really, really silly. The actual legend of the Great Pyramid is that there was an Egyptian priesthood with a crystal, and this comes from a variety of sources, including leaked inside information, that there were priests and priestesses in there. They would have a large crystal that they would use. You would lie down in the sarcophagus, and then you would go through an initiation experience. The pyramid initiation experience is driven by the energies of the Great Pyramid itself. And this gets into a whole other subject that I don't have time to talk about in today's show, which is the science of pyramid power. Why is it that when you build a pyramid, that it will have certain energetic properties? And in the 1970s, people were building little pyramids out of cardboard, and they were able to keep their razor blades sharper for a lot longer. And in fact, there was a Russian scientist who actually studied this under a scanning electron microscope, where he looked at the surface of a razor blade that was dull, and then he put it inside a pyramid, aligned it with magnetic north, or rotational north, either one. And then, later on, when he went back and looked at the razor blade again under the scanning electron microscope, the blade had actually become sharper. Now, what this suggests is that this energy, that first of all, it suggests there's some sort of energy coming through the pyramid. What does the word pyramid actually mean? Pyramid means fire in the middle. Well, what is the fire in the middle? It appears to be some sort of energetic fire that's happening in the king's chamber. The sarcophagus is intended for you to lie down in it and experience this fire in the middle that the pyramid causes, because it is a spiritually activating energy. So the very, very short idea of how this works, let's go over to this one again. I need to use my hands. The very short idea of how the pyramid structure works is essentially requiring a reinterpretation of gravity. And we're going to get a lot into this, some of this, in the new class, Gateway to Galactic Mind, which I hope to see you in. And I'm only going to say the exoteric things in this show. I'm not going to really get into the deep stuff here. But anyway, if you look at what's happening with the Great Pyramid and with the initiation of the Great Pyramid, the energy that the Great Pyramid apparently creates, there is a theory that explains how a simple shape like a pyramid could actually cause energy to be generated. So bear with me real quick. I'm going to give you a very quick version of this. One of the books, one of the scientific papers that really tripped me out and changed my life was a scientific paper by Dr. Oliver Crane called, and it's a big one, Central Oscillator in the Space-Time Quantum Medium. And I read this in about 1998. I printed it out, and when I actually cut my finger as I was leaving the house, I accidentally bled on the book. So there's some of my blood is still on the book cover, the book that I had printed off of the printer. And that made me feel like, well, that book's important because my blood ended up falling on it in this very crazy event in my life. What does this Central Oscillator in Space-Time Quantum Medium paper argue? Well, what Dr. Oliver Crane did is he goes back to the B-field-Brown effect. And if you don't know this, this is something that apparently is getting ready to be declassified, or soon will be, as a result of what's going to happen in June. The B-field-Brown effect was discovered by Thomas Townsend Brown, and then his physics professor, B-field, helped to kind of refine the theory. But the basic idea is that if you charge up a metallic plate with a very, very high electrical charge, that it will start to generate thrust and move around. So the original Thomas Brown experiment was of kind of a roundish electrical plate that's attached to an axle, and then it starts spinning around like this just by being electrically charged. It actually creates thrust. And Thomas Brown's research, with the help of Professor Beefield, concluded that as electrical energy is moving from a negative pole to a positive pole, the flow of charge is negative to positive, we know this, that as you have an electrical flow from negative to positive, that you are getting a gravitational thrust. Now this is something that conventional science doesn't give us. They haven't unified gravity and electromagnetism. The closest you get in conventional theory is where they have to add the fifth dimension. So they say, okay, there's 3 dimensions. Einstein says time is the 4th dimension. Well, then in order to make gravity unify with electromagnetism, you got to add one more. So that's Kaluza-Klein theory. So you got to add another dimension just to make gravity and electromagnetism work together. Maybe not. Maybe Kaluza-Klein theory is wrong, because Dr. Oliver Crane's model shows that the charge flow is also a gravitational flow. In other words, the flow of electricity creates a gravitational flow. They are both the same field, actually, in just different forms, and one works with the other. Normally, the type of electrostatic charges that we're using are much too weak to cause this effect to occur. But if you actually go back to the late 1990s, there were many people doing these experiments where they make little foil triangles of like an aluminum foil, and they have very fine wires on them, and then they simply run a large amount of electricity through this tiny little foil triangle, and the triangle lifts off the ground and levitates. That's proof that this works. The only reason that conventional science really couldn't have done anything with this then is that you need an enormous amount of energy to actually make the levitation, the anti-gravity, happen. And so you would need some kind of power system that's better than anything we have now for this particular type of anti-gravity to actually function. And then, of course, the power system has to weigh less than the craft, so that it has to have a low enough center of gravity that you can generate enough power to overcome its gravity. But here's where Dr. Oliver Crane in this paper really blew me away, is he said, look, if gravity is flowing from negative to positive electrical charge, then that's the same thing that we see in the atom, isn't it? Because atoms have electrical charge, don't they? Do you remember what it is? What are the electrons charged with? They're negatively charged. What is the nucleus charged with? Positive charge. Protons in the nucleus are positively charged. Electrons are negatively charged. So Dr. Oliver Crane is the first person I'm aware of in the open source literature to speculate that the flow of charge inside the atom is also a gravitational flow. And therefore, this idea would be that the atom itself is the result of a flow. It is a vortex. It is a vortex in space. And the negative to positive charge is also not only an electrical flow, it's a gravitational flow. What do you get to do if you have that basic model? What we see then is the idea that the negative charge is flowing towards the positive, the electrons are flowing towards the nucleus. Let's blow up that atom now to the size of the Earth. We don't want to literally blow it up because you get a nuclear explosion. But let's just expand the size of the atom to the size of the Earth. The gravity is flowing towards the center of the Earth. So Dr. Oliver Crane said, the Earth is just made up of a lot of atoms, and so the gravitational flow is going negative to positive from the outside to the in, because we see it's the charge flow is the same as gravitational flow. Negative to positive is a gravitational push. So then he says, what if the whole Earth is actually, the gravity is flowing into the Earth from the outside? And this explains the mystery of the space-time fabric, because remember, Einstein tried to say Earth is like something sitting on a sheet and it's weighing the sheet down. But that sheet only works for like the top half. The bottom half is on the bottom of the sheet. And things don't just roll into the Earth. It's flowing into the Earth equally from all sides. So what Dr. Oliver Crane ultimately concluded is that atoms are being powered and manufactured by gravity. The electrical charge might even be some kind of after effect of this gravitational flow. So if each atom is made of gravitational flow, then when you have an Earth that's made up of a whole bunch of atoms, you have a much larger gravitational flow going in. So gravity is what's flowing into the Earth to create the Earth moment by moment. Now, if you can follow me this far, the next thing that I would want you to see is that it is like a fluid-like energy. It actually has fluid-like characteristics. So as the Earth is doing all this stuff, as the gravity is flowing into the Earth, it's also going to be spinning along the way. There is a rotational aspect to this energy that flows into the Earth to make the Earth. And we can see this, for example, with the Coriolis effect. If you fire a cannonball in the northern hemisphere, it's going to bend in one direction. If you fire off a cannonball in the southern hemisphere, it bends in the opposite direction. And this is also supposedly why water flows down a drain differently in Australia than it does in America. So, of course, being a science nerd, when I landed in Auckland, New Zealand for my Australia tour that I did back in 2012, first thing I did is flush the toilet in my hotel in New Zealand. And sure enough, the water was going in the opposite direction. That was very amusing, to say the least. So the Coriolis effect shows that gravity is spinning as it goes into the Earth. To some degree, we know that's happening. Now, if you build a pyramid, and all of this energy is flowing into the pyramid to build the pyramid moment by moment, and it's a fluid-like energy, as it flows into the pyramid, it's actually the same as if you're dumping water into a funnel upside down. Just imagine the pyramid's upside down, okay? So if you're pouring water into this upside down pyramid, and then you put a hole at the bottom where the capstone is, and the pyramid's a funnel now, and you pour all this water into the pyramid, what will naturally happen to the water? The water will naturally start spinning. That's what it's going to do. It's going to flow through the hole on the bottom, and it's going to create this vortex. That is exactly what's happening inside the pyramid by the simple fact that it's sitting there and it exists. And this is why, if you've watched some of my other videos, when the Russians rebuilt pyramids out of PVC pipe and fiberglass facing, they found that the pyramids were doing amazing, amazing things. The pyramids, for example, were deflecting severe weather. A severe weather storm coming into the area where the pyramid was built, and these were sometimes, over 100 feet tall, steep pyramids. They built them very sharp angles like this, not the normal Giza angle like this, but more like a steep angle like that, okay? Like an obelisk almost. Those Russian pyramids did all kinds of amazing stuff. They deflected severe weather. They appeared to be reducing the amount of earthquake activity inside the Earth in that area. They would purify oil wells, so you get better oil. They would purify water. They actually built one of these pyramids over a radioactive aquifer near Chernobyl, where the water was totally contaminated with radiation. And in a short time after they built the pyramid there, the water was clean. They also found that when you build a pyramid in a particular area, that a lot more rainfall would start to happen, and you get exotic vegetation that was growing. One of the strangest effects of these Russian pyramids was that they got extinct versions of ferns growing out of the ground in the area where the pyramid was built. As if this energy is somehow informing biology and calling something up out of like a genetic DNA record, where existing plants most likely were molecularly reconfigured to older plants. And that's another thing. The molecular reconfiguration by energy is another thing I'm going to go over once again in Gateway to Galactic Mind. So I'm just giving you an overview of some very strange things. The craziest stuff, however, is what happens to people and to biological life with the pyramid power. One of the things they did is they took slabs of granite from the pyramid and they built selected jail cells out of them in Russia. And those prisoners that were living inside the pyramid rocks with the pyramid energy in them were much nicer. They got along with everybody better. They would discuss things instead of fighting. They were less violent. They got off of alcohol, hard drugs. They rehabilitated. All this amazing stuff happened, and there was no change except that they got the pyramid rocks in their jail cells. I mean, a granite jail cell is pretty freaking awesome. If you're going to get arrested, I guess you should do it in Russia. I'm just saying, that's just an aside. Anyway, what we're looking at is that when they took water and stored it inside. This is the craziest one, folks, so just buckle your seatbelt for this. When they took water and they stored it inside the pyramid, and they gave 1 milliliter, ml, a little tiny milliliter, when they gave 1 milliliter of water from the pyramid that had been stored in it for a few days, and this is a Russian pyramid, this is not the Great Pyramid, just one of these Russian PVC pyramids, they gave it to a prematurely born baby that was written off for dead because it was too young, and conventional medical science says, well, this baby's gone. And they gave those babies pyramid water. They lived. All of them lived. If you give pyramid water to somebody with cancer, they have a massive decrease in cancerous tumors. If you give it to somebody with diabetes, apparently it cures diabetes. It cures everything. Anything that could go wrong with the human body, if you give the human body pyramid energy, or any type of lab animals, a rat, whatever, they get over this. And so the pyramid seems to have an amazing benefit on mental health, like the pyramid study with the prisoners. There's also studies where they took trapezoidal rooms. They put schizophrenics and people with mental illness in the mental hospital. They gave them a trapezoidal room where the walls taper in like this and it's flat on the top, kind of making it like a pyramid. And they end up doing a lot better that way. Also, the work of R.D. Laing on schizophrenia shows that if you take schizophrenics and have them go outside, walk around in nature, put their hands in the soil, do some planting and some gardening, that most, if not almost all, of their schizophrenic symptoms disappear. And this, again, is related to this natural energy from the earth. So the reason my first book is called Source Field Investigations is that there was a reason for me to come up with a new name for this energy, and I called it the source field. The Russians typically call it torsion fields, and source and torsion kind of rhyme, so I liked that. But when you're looking at something that's a lot more than just gravity now, you have to give it a new name. It's the source of consciousness. It's the source of vitality for biological life. Some of the Russian studies actually showed that up to 50% of the energy that makes plants alive is coming from this background energy that is associated with gravity. It's the source of everything that we have. Space, time, matter, energy, consciousness, it's all part of this source field. It's created by the source field. So the really cool trick is that you can actually build a machine with no moving parts that nonetheless works like an engine and gets the source field to spin and rotate. And when you concentrate it in a given area, and you get a lot more of it in one area, you get increases in consciousness, increases in biological health, and you get people becoming a lot nicer and more spiritually integrated. Okay? And we already know that from the Russian studies. But now I'm going to drop it on you, okay? What if you take that same pyramid energy that we already have seen from the Russian studies does all this amazing stuff, and you concentrate it really strongly into one part in the middle of the pyramid. And you make that a room. And then in that room, you build a sarcophagus, which is like a tuned resonating chamber for the human body to lie down inside of it. Well, wouldn't you get like, okay, theoretically, and I'm not saying that we absolutely are going to claim this, because then people say, you know, quack science or whatever, but the Russians allege that it cures cancer. They allege that it cures other diseases. If you go into that sarcophagus, don't you think you'd get a big health blast? Don't you think it would turn your health around? And if those prisoners are becoming a lot nicer and more spiritually integrated, is the pyramid designed for this? Is the pyramid designed to actually spring-load you to the higher level of your own spiritual growth? Well, that apparently is what it was built for. It apparently was built for a human being to lie down inside the sarcophagus, to spend a night inside the pyramid with the help of these tuned healers who have crystals. And then you go through an initiation experience. Now, initiation is incredibly terrifying. In the original Freemason lodges, they would, just to get into the lodge, you have to have a bandage put across your face. Let's go to this one. You have to have a bandage across your face, and then they tie up your pants, so you got one pant leg that goes up to here. You have to open up your shirt, and then originally they took a rapier, they took the kind of sword that you use in sword fighting, and they put it right against your heart. In modern times, I've heard that they actually pull a gun on you, okay, and they hold a gun on you. Not the greatest thing, but the idea is with the sword against your heart, it is the fear that creates the initiation, and then when you realize they're not going to kill you, you have this kind of rebirth experience, and that's not very nice. Okay, let's be honest, but it mirrors what happens in many of these shamanic traditions as well. If you want to become a shaman, if you want to have shamanic powers, typically there is some type of shamanic injury that initiates all that. You have a shamanic injury that could be, or sometimes it was even done deliberately. People would, for example, put spikes through underneath their muscles and then hang themselves for the shamanic initiation. There's a Inuit native shamanism up in Alaska where they would actually chop at their legs with an axe. Please don't do this, okay? Please don't do this. Modern initiation is just being alive on Earth, so you don't need to do anything crazy. But the point is, in the past, these shamanic injuries would activate your spiritual self. There's a lot of different techniques that people were using like this. But in what we're talking about today, the pyramid itself was designed to put you through initiation. So what does that mean? That means that as you're lying there in state in the pyramid, well, you're not really in state because that means you're dead. But as you're lying there in the pyramid, you kind of go into a death-like state. And you experience a full, discontinuous trip to the afterlife. Much like the idea if you took way, way too much in terms of any type of psychedelic drug, which I don't recommend, but that's when people start to have these discontinuous experiences where you're not aware of the room, you're not aware of your physical body anymore, you are transmigrated to some different place that appears to be some address in some domain in the spiritual world. You go into a domain that has its own address, and it's real, and you experience things in this domain that are accurate, and then you're able to come back after the psychedelics wear off and bring something back with you from that domain. Apparently, the Great Pyramid's granite sarcophagus does this. It has this same type of consciousness discontinuous effect where you get launched into another domain. Okay, well, yeah, David, that sounds really freaking fun. I want to do it. I want to do it. No, you don't. And the reason why you don't want to do it is that when you go into that domain, it is a horror movie. What do I mean by horror movie? I mean that you are faced with the exact nature of all of the karma that you've created in this life. So there's different ways to deal with your karma. You can deal with it in the conventional way, nice and slow, one step at a time, and you burn off a little karma, you burn off a little karma. Or apparently with this pyramid initiation, you can go in there and you can burn off all of your karma at once. In order to do this, you have to go through an extremely, extremely horrific process, which is essentially like getting stuck in a nightmare that never ends, or it doesn't seem to end, and you are faced with all of the things that you did to hurt others. You have to re-experience it. It's sort of like the idea of the life review in the afterlife, but you're doing it while you're still alive. You review everything that happened. You review all the karma that you created. You have monsters chasing after you. You probably have shamanic death. You have a very visceral experience. If you've studied shamanism, people have these visionary experiences where they're eaten alive by animals, or their bodies are ripped apart or cut apart, and your body's completely disintegrated. So it's very, very nasty. You would be given extensive preparation before you did this as to what to expect, how difficult it's going to be, and only the bravest and perhaps the most foolish people would do this. However, if you do it successfully, if you burn off all the karma in this horrific nightmare, then what happens is that you come out with ascended abilities. And this is one of the really interesting things, because the Edgar Cayce reading said that a intuitively derived book called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ was real. So follow me, right? Edgar Cayce had 14,000 medical readings. You're sitting there in your house on a given day, and that's all he knows is that you're there, but he diagnoses your medical problems and he prescribes treatment that works, that nobody else had thought of. And it's usually, he's going to talk about a mind-body-spirit connection to your ailment, where it's a spiritual problem that's actually affecting you physically. The Edgar Cayce readings also said that this book called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ was authentic and true, that the information in it was actually genuinely derived from higher level consciousness. This book makes the argument that Jesus actually completed his ascension inside the Great Pyramid. That he may have been the only one, we don't really know, he may have been the only one to ever actually use this technology for what it was designed for. So when you hear about the 3 missing years of Jesus and all this stuff, apparently, according to the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, he went to the Great Pyramid, he participated in this process, they initiated him, it worked, and this is when he was then ready to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey and show that he was the prophetic messianic reincarnation. Now, he didn't say it, he said, I am the Son of Man, but obviously riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, which nobody would normally do, they'd use a camel or a horse. That was the fulfillment of the prophecy. So, if they had horses then, I'm not even sure if they had horses in Jerusalem at the time, but it definitely would have had camels. So the donkey thing is a very particular thing that he did to show that he was this prophecy realized. So Jesus may have been the only one who was actually able to use this technology. And in this new class that you're going to be enjoying with me, Gateway to Galactic Mind, we're going to start in 2 weeks on Sunday. It's going to be 5 Sundays in a row. All kinds of great material. We're going to go through the astonishing connections between Jesus and the Great Pyramid. And they are extensive. And what I will be arguing in this class is something we all, anybody who really has been supportive of Christianity really should see this, because it appears from material like the Law of One series, and actually just an academic study of the Great Pyramid, that the Great Pyramid's measurements didn't just have that encoding of the earth, but they have the encoding of Jesus. They have the encoding of when Jesus is born, when he ascends, and the fallout thereafter. There is a timeline in the passages of the Great Pyramid, I'm not going to go into it in today's video, where 1 pyramid inch equals 1 year. And so in the previous Ascension Mystery School class, I went through all of that, and I also give a very exhaustive view of it over here in Awakening in the Dream. So there's a whole chapter in this book that is all about the pyramid timeline. So you don't have to take my conference to learn this information, but it's so much more complex than I could do in one video that I would prefer to just have you read the book. It's not very expensive, and that will help you to really understand this pyramid timeline. But anyway, what I want to talk about first of all is what actually happened to Napoleon. And I dropped my clicker here. What actually happened to Napoleon when he went to the pyramid? So back to the slide now. Here he was with all the Egyptians, and they had told him about, well, if you stay in the sarcophagus, you will turn into a god. Well, I want to do that because I think I already am a god. So Napoleon spent 1 night in the Great Pyramid, and then he drew this line art image, or I think he'd probably already sketched the image, and then what he did is he wrote over it after he'd been in the pyramid. So it's all in French and obviously cursive writing, but if you read all this, what you're seeing is Napoleon's recounting of what happened when he spent 1 night in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. 1 night in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. Somebody said close-up of the book, please. Okay, we can do that. So let's go to this one. What are we, 2? Yeah. So this is Awakening in the Dream. And that's just from the comments. One of you guys asked me to show a close-up of the book. And I know it's out of focus in the background. So if you go to, let's see, where is it? So there's a chapter here called, there's a couple of them. There's a chapter called The Pyramid Timeline. I'll just open up to that. You can see it right there. I don't know if you can, that's probably not really that visible. But it's chapter 19, Pyramid Timelines, page 351. There's a few chapters on this. So again, here it is. Let me stick it back on the table here. So what are we dealing with this pyramid timeline? Well, it very, very strongly flags the time of Jesus as being the most important period of human evolution. So when Napoleon stayed in the Great Pyramid, though, he had a very terrifying experience. So in this handwritten document that we're seeing here, what did he end up saying? He said that he had nightmare after nightmare after nightmare the entire time that he was in there. He'd never had such an evil experience in his life. He couldn't sleep. He was terrified the entire night, and he ran screaming out in the morning and said he will never go into that room again, and he never did because he was so terrified. So that's what this energy is supposed to do to you, folks. That's what this energy is supposed to do to you. It's supposed to push you through initiation. It's supposed to get you to face your karma. And the design of the pyramid is like a passive engine. It actually is creating a spinning fire in the middle, pyramid, pyramid. Pyramid means fire in the middle, right? There's a spinning energy. When Napoleon went in there, because his soul was impure, he could not handle that higher energy, because this is ultimately a loving, conscious energy. It is actually the energy of Christ. You could call it the Holy Spirit. This is what the universe is made of. There's different names for it, but it exists. And its fundamental basis is love. So when you're bombarded with this loving energy that is of a much higher frequency, okay, you actually get a consciousness effect from it. And that effect is very profound. So now what we're going to see here in the next slide is an image from Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall. Or actually, I think this one was a picture from Secret Teachings of All Ages, but this is in Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. Anyway, what you're seeing here is the original idea of how this was done with the sarcophagus. Now note, the sarcophagus is actually incorrectly drawn. It is a square. It doesn't have rounded edges like what you're seeing in this image. But the basic idea is here that you have the Egyptian priests. They're wearing really cool headdresses. You know, we could probably sell those on the website. I'm just thinking about this out loud, but that might be fun. We could 3D print them, you know. We'll get a gold 3D printer, print them out of gold. Anyway, they're holding their space. You don't really see the crystals here, but apparently they had crystals involved. And then you're lying in the sarcophagus, and notice that the Ka, or spirit body, is now rising out of the person. They have the silver cord, and you see him with wings. So this again is the Egyptian mythology of going into your spiritual body. So I do want to actually show you a couple of these things regarding how all of this works with your own initiation and how the pyramid is connected to Christianity. Because one of the biggest failings, if there was a failing of this book, Awakening the Dream, was simply that I didn't have enough space to show you the pictures. So I want to show you one of these pictures so that you can kind of get a sense of some of the weird connections between the pyramid and Jesus. That, again, it supports the idea that the pyramid was originally built as a prophecy of the coming Christ, and it's only negative forces that reappropriated the pyramid to make it into something that we now associate with, oh, it's the Illuminati, oh, it's bad, it's evil. No, look, the pyramid was not only built to prophesize the coming Christ, it was built to activate his mission and ensure that it worked. So when we read the Law of One, we have a source that claims that it was the extraterrestrial group that designed the pyramid, that built it, you know, out of what they call everlasting rock. That's another interesting thing we'll go into in Gateway to Galactic Mind, my upcoming conference. But some of these things that I talk about in the book, the connection between the pyramid and Christianity, you really have to see it to understand it. So I want to show you a couple of these images before we end today's session. So check this one out. The reflection of the pyramid creates a cross shape at the summer solstice, but only because of the casing stones. So check this out. A lot of the Christian scholars have really, really gotten into this. So first of all, let's look at the bottom. Now remember, the casing stones are mirror polished, they are gleaming white, they reflect the sunlight, right? So in the beginning, if you were in a spaceship and you were looking down at the pyramid, you would see these reflections that would show up as white light on the surface of the sand around the pyramid. You follow me? So here we are in the summer solstice, and you will notice that if you were hanging out over the pyramid while the casing stones were there, it is a very precise crucifix. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's surprisingly close. And then, going back to the previous slide, what gets even more exciting is that as you go from December 2nd and 3rd, which is, again, you know, the winter solstice, I believe. So yeah, when you travel from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, December 2nd and 3rd, and then you go through February 27th, 28th, notice that, okay, I need a big one here. Notice that the shape is like a man on the cross, okay? You have the arms on the cross before it turns into the crucifix. So, and then of course, Jesus' birth is around the time of the winter solstice, right? And then the crucifixion, right? And the crucifixion comes to fruition around Easter, which is theoretically symbolized by the summer solstice, where he ascends and becomes Christ, and it turns into the crucifix. So let's go back to the slide again. So we are literally seeing the image of a man on the cross here, with his arms held up on the cross, and then it transforms into the crucifix during the exact period of time between Jesus' birth and Jesus' ascension. That in and of itself, some people, I don't believe that. David, you're reaching. Well, just bear in mind, I'm not the first one to talk about this. Many scholars, many scholars have talked about this. This is nothing new, and it's been in many books. But that's not all. There's a lot of other interesting evidence. So check this next one out. If you actually take the slope angle of the pyramid, meaning the angle of its actual slope angle, and then you take the latitude line through the pyramid, and you draw that angle. This is the slope angle, by the way. It's the angle of the inner passageways. This is not the actual surface of the pyramid on the outside. This is the angle of the inner passageways of the pyramid. Okay, that's 26.3 degrees. So if you take a straight latitude line and you put it through the Great Pyramid, so that's straight east to west, and then you take the angle of the inner passageways and you draw it up from the pyramid and you go east, it directly, without any mathematical fudge factor whatsoever, it directly crosses through Bethlehem. That line bifurcates Bethlehem. And it also crosses the River Jordan, as we saw in the biblical Exodus. The parting of the crossing of the River Jordan is a major part of the Exodus story. So it's interesting because all of these things are like historically related to Jesus, right? The Exodus is what paved the way. The Old Testament paved the way for the New Testament. You have it cross directly through Bethlehem. And again, people are like, oh, you're reaching. This is a coincidence. But this is exactly what we would expect if benevolent ETs built the pyramid to prophesize the coming Christ. It makes the crucifix on the ground, starts out as the crucified man, and then over the months it evens out, becomes a crucifix, and then the slope angle inside, with no mathematical fudge factor, you just draw that angle off of the east-west line, and it goes right through Bethlehem and crosses the river. Very, very peculiar. Now, we have another culture that was building pyramids at the same time in Mesoamerica, and you might not have seen this either, but this is extremely bizarre. So we're saying the pyramid could be a prophecy of the coming Christ, but then when we look at what's actually happening in Mesoamerica, we have Yaxcatecutli, and Yaxcatecutli is unbelievably similar to Jesus, and this is another thing that these ancient scholars had figured out. Here I'll read the subheading. Yaxcatecutli, Aztec pre-conquest Lord of the Vanguard. His name presumably signifies he who leads the way, just like Jesus, right? And he's got a beard, and it says that he had white skin, I guess, because there's a lot of that kind of stuff. The many legends of what they called Pahana, the white brother, and then the people came back as conquerors and took advantage of this. It was very, very sad because they thought they were seeing gods, but they were actually horrible people in this case. But originally they weren't. So it says he was the god of the wandering vendors and missionaries known as the Potecas. So is this absolute proof that the pyramid building culture in Mesoamerica was prophesizing Jesus or some type of Jesus-like being the same way that happened in Egypt? It's not absolute proof, but it's pretty freaking weird because he's got a cross, he's crucified, he's got the beard, and it is he who leads the way, right? So that's very, very interesting, and most people have never heard of this. So another thing that's very interesting is that the passageways of the Great Pyramid themselves reveal a stylized image of the hero. This is another thing I talked about in the book that I don't think is very easy to visualize, okay? If you look at the passageways from the side angle, then what do you see here? What you see here, and I think I can get my mouse in there and you'll be able to see this. The king's chamber up at the top represents like the head of a body. The queen's chamber would represent something like a heart. The grotto would represent the masculine organs, as you see here, and then on the bottom where the pit is would be the feet, and then you have a vertical line that represents all the passageways. So, I don't want to cut away from this. I want you to keep looking at this real quick. So what we're looking at here is a stylized image of a man, where the king's chamber is his head, the queen's chamber is his heart, the grotto is his root chakra, and the pit is his feet, when seen from the side. But also notice that he is the king of kings. The king's chamber has the crown, all these layers of chambers above it. So it appears that what the pyramid is doing is it's encoding a stick figure of the hero, which the pyramid, remember, prophesizes the coming Christ. So this king with the crown is a stick figure representation of the coming Christ, but it's also the galactic mind. It's the logos that's awakening in all of us, right? So it's not just one person. Jesus, as I said last time, in John 14:12 said, "As I do these things," and he's talking about walking on water, changing water into wine, spitting on somebody's eyes and curing their blindness, raising Lazarus from the dead. He did a lot of amazing stuff. "As I do these things," he said, "so shall you do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father," which is, again, the cosmic consciousness. So we actually have a stylized image of the hero. Another thing I talk about in the book that I didn't really have enough visual support for, I want you to read the book so you learn the whole timeline. I'm not going to do it all now, but I want you to see how the timeline was fixed. So the starting year of the timeline is aligned with the pole star and the Pleiades. And this is, again, from these pyramid books. So you have to wait for a moment where the pole star, which again is the star that never moves in the night sky, it's the North Star, it always stays in one place. All the other stars rotate around it in circles. My wife and I, a couple weeks ago, found our own North Star as we were sitting out on the back porch looking out at the stars. Thankfully, we're in an area where you can actually see the stars now, unlike when we were in Los Angeles. So you got to have the pole star, and it has to shine down through the descending passage all the way down into the pit at the bottom. So you see that black line that goes down below the surface of the pyramid, and there's a room down there. That's where the feet are, as we just showed you. And then it's on top. It actually has to bore through solid bedrock. So that, by the way, that descending passageway deviates by less than 1/4 of an inch all the way down, and the only way you could do that in modern times is with laser-controlled drilling, and it's bored through bedrock. So obviously, if they've already bored through bedrock and we can see that, there could be a lot more of this bedrock that was carved out into underground tunnels all underneath the Giza Plateau, as many researchers have reported. And apparently there were sonic readings showing these tunnels, but they've never really been released. So if you've already seen them bore through this bedrock to make the descending passage, then clearly it could be done elsewhere. So now I want you to envision the North Star shining all the way down so that you could put a bowl of water at the bottom of the pit, and you'd see the image of the North Star in the water. That means it's in perfect alignment. Then you got to have the Pleiades directly overhead. So the absolute overhead point where the Pleiades are right there, precisely at the exact center of the dome of the heavens. So that only happens once, and that's what fixates the alignment. And then inside, there's an exact set of lines called the scored lines, and that represents when you start counting by 1 pyramid inch equals 1 year. So here again, so let me just go back to that slide. The coordinates of when you start counting are set by these scored lines. The scored lines you can actually see here. There is a descending passage, so there's the descending passage again. And then what we actually find as you go down the descending passage is these lines carved into the wall. Well, those lines apparently are the marker for that alignment of 2141 BC, which is when this alignment took place. And then as you go on through the pyramid timeline from here, you have an amazing, amazing number of things where by starting at 2141 BC, start at the scored lines, count 1 inch equals 1 year, and you go all the way through this stuff, and so many things happen. The exact time that Jesus was born, the exact time that he ascended, the invention of the printing press, the invention of the telegraph, the Renaissance, the Reformation, World War I, World War II, Einstein's theory of relativity. So many things are so precisely calibrated in the pyramid timeline that the idea that this was random is impossible. You could not have so many dates that all correspond to the end. But again, the Great Pyramid also had the precession of the equinoxes across the diagonals, and the big thing, of course, is the capstone. The Great Pyramid is built symbolically with a flat top. And so there is a basic numerological system that is used for each of the numbers that we count with. So the number 5 is going to represent something completely different than the number 6. The number 5 in alleged pyramid numerology, oh, here comes my dog. The number 5, she's following you. She's not coming downstairs, though. Let's just leave her alone for now. She knows not to come down here. Anyway, the number 5 in pyramid mythology means perfection, and the number 6 means imperfection. So right now I'm going to show you the legend. If you wanted to pause this and look at this, hopefully it's good enough resolution you can read everything. It shows you what each of the different numbers means. And I'm not going to go through all this because I'm going to be 3 hours in pretty soon. 2 hours and 40 minutes in right now. I didn't want this to go beyond 3 hours. So we're going to wrap it up here. But the point is, in fact, let me go back to this one slide so you can see this really clearly. Hold on. So I want you to see the top. Yeah, here we go. All right. So look at this. Now, this is an exaggerated view of the Great Pyramid as it exists today. And again, we're seeing that all of the different measurements of the pyramid have all these interesting symbolic connections. You have the year encoded in the dimensions. You have the precession of the equinoxes encoded in the 25,826.4 pyramid inches, which again is very close to the 25,000 years. Okay, so we just talked about that. But notice that this particular version of the pyramid has a flat top. Now let's just don't worry about the fact that each face is cut in half, because again, it's almost completely imperceptible. Basically, the pyramid has how many sides? Well, let's count it. You got 4 faces, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, north, south, east, west. You got a flat bottom, so that's 5, and you got a flat top, that's 6. 6-sided object. 6 in the pyramid numerology, which is mirrored in other Egyptian sources that they talk about. The number 6 has a symbolic meaning similar to numerology. It's pyramid numerology, but it means imperfection, it means karma, it means samsara, the lack of spiritual wisdom, spiritual death, lack of understanding. So the whole pyramid has an unfinished appearance. Even though it had these casing stones on it, the capstone wasn't there. And the pyramid encodes the Earth's dimensions, right? So the pyramid, what is it actually telling us about the Earth? It suggests that the Earth is unfinished. It suggests that the Earth is a work in progress. And it suggests that the arrival of the capstone symbolizes the perfection of the Earth, just as it would perfect the pyramid. You put the capstone on the pyramid, now the pyramid's perfect. It's like the Earth is getting its own capstone. Looking at this image again, what would happen to the number of sides of the pyramid if you eliminated the top by making it just a point? Well, okay, now we have the bottom is 1, the 4 sides are 4 more, so you have 5. Do you have a 6 on the top anymore? No, you don't. You lose the top. You now have a 5-sided object. So the pyramid tells you that there's going to be a journey in the Earth. The Earth is unfinished. The Earth hasn't been completed. It doesn't have its capstone. There's going to be a journey from the unfinished Earth spiritually to the finished Earth. That's the arrival of the capstone. What does the number 5 again mean in numerology in the pyramid? It means perfection. So the Earth is perfected. And the Bible has a lot of really interesting things in it, including this very weird code phrase about Jesus, where it says, the stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. And that's in reference to Jesus, right? Okay. A cornerstone normally is in one of the 4 sides of a building, and it would have the date on it, and it might have a time capsule in it, so if you dig it out, you'll find relics from the time the building was built. That's typically done. You might see one that says 1917. If you're walking around in the city and they had a building back from 1917, you look at the corner of the building, you'll see a stone that's not brick, it's cement usually, and it'll have the date carved in it. That's called a cornerstone, okay? Every normal building has 4 corners, right? So there is no such thing as a chief cornerstone. And everybody would know that. Cornerstones are on all 4 sides. That's the definition of a cornerstone. It's a stone on the corner. How the hell do you get a chief cornerstone? There's only one way to do that. It's a cornerstone that's on the top. The stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. The stone you put on the top, the capstone, that represents Jesus, but it also represents the fulfillment of this hero's journey, Christ path, which again happens at the end of the 25,000-year cycle. The end of the cycle, it's encoded in 23 different ancient mythologies, that there's going to be some kind of a solar flash, and this whole thing, the diagonals, remember, looking at this once again, we have exactly 25,826.4 pyramid inches, which corresponds so beautifully to this wobble in the Earth's axis. So, this is a really, really fascinating line of inquiry, and it's just some of the astonishing information about the Great Pyramid